We are going to be talking about the truth about banned books. And we are going to be, and that's literally the article that I'm going to be reading from the Free Press.
No.
But I'm always shocked how like the left will be like, oh, the right's out there banning books and they're horrible and then I'm like, okay.
Didn't we ban Dr. Seuss? Not the left banned Dr. Seuss.
You guys like just ban Dr. Seuss? Like, don't you ban books all the time these days? You guys are like actually burning Anne Frank's diary, and I'll put the thing on the screen here because a lot of people don't know how like anti-Semitic a lot of like the far commies are, because keep in mind, Marx did write, like, what is it? Like The Jewish Problem or whatever is his first book.
No.
Commies are very anti-Semitic. But yeah, the books that you guys are banning, the Dr. Seuss and stuff like that, horrifying that you guys are banning this. You are actually banning like pieces of our tradition and stuff like that. You look at the books that the conservatives are banning, and they're like actual pornography.
Mm-hmm.
They'll like demonstrate using cartoon characters for children how to give fellatio and stuff.
What?
Like,
wait. In your...
We'll get into all that in a second.
Okay, let's.
Would you like to know more?
But before we get into that, I want to go into this particular piece because it also shows that conservatives don't actually really ban books. It's mostly a progressive fabrication.
Dog whistle. Like the Don't Say Gay bill, where that's not.
Yeah. So what she's talking about with the Don't Say Gay bill is we know the people who wrote that bill before it ever left the Republican side of the planning committee. There was concern that it could be used to prevent gay teachers from talking about their personal lives to their students or letting their students know that they were gay. And so that was removed from the bill by conservatives before it left the conservative planning stage. And then progressives made up that that's what it would do. And yet it has never been used that way. It doesn't do that at all. And yet they created this huge fight and stuff around this where they've created this perception like, oh, conservatives are out to get gay people. But it's more, no, conservatives were concerned about the huge number of child rapes that are happening in our school system right now, that right now are higher on a not on an absolute level, but on a per teacher to per preacher level than they were during the Catholic Church at the height of the scandal. It is bad. There is a reason to be putting these laws in place. So just for people who aren't familiar with the current stats, here's an article from The Federalist. 1 in 10 K through 12 students has been sexually abused by a teacher. And it says the rate of sexual misconduct in public schools far exceeds the high-profile abuse scandals that rocked the Roman Catholic Church and the Boy Scouts of America. And this article came out in 2024, July 15th. Also, admittedly, it is not just the high number of rapes that are the problem. It is also the systemic attempts at brainwashing children into ideologies that have extremely negative mental health outcomes, which is something we talk about in other videos.
This has been my first year in preschool with a class of my own, teaching alongside another queer neurodivergent educator, and we have been rocking our twos class. We've been talking about gender and skin color and consent and empathy and our bodies and autonomy. It's been fabulous. But our teaching team is shifting and a new person is being onboarded, someone with many years of experience. So today at the lunch table, when the topic of gender and genitals came up, one of our students plainly looked up and said, "Well, I'm a girl today, but I know that teacher Co isn't." No, they're NB. And the look on the incoming teacher's face was priceless. She was shocked in a good way, and she just looked around at the two of us and said, "This class was incredible, and I am so impressed."
But anyway, I want to get to this piece right here. So, for example, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Imran X. Kendi, which argues that the, quote, only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination, end quote. So a book that is actively arguing for discrimination is stocked in 42% of U.S. school districts that were surveyed. Meanwhile, only a single school district, Northside Independent School District in San Antonio, Texas, offers students Woke Racism by John McWhorter, a book that challenges the borderline religious anti-racist ideas advocated by Kennedy. So what we're showing here is, if you're talking about what's actually being stocked at the stores, like, are conservatives influencing this? Are they influencing what books are there and what books aren't? They're just not. And conservative books that are even like Middle Road, or if you're saying, oh, I want both sides presented, are functionally banned from our libraries, even fairly mainstream ones. So Felix Ever After, a book by Kaysen Kaller that claims that girls who hate, quote, being forced into dresses and being given dolls, end quote, are transgender, is available in 77% of school districts surveyed.
Wow.
But not a single school out of nearly 5,000 offered books critical of trans theories. Students won't find books like Trans by Helen Joyce or Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters by Abigail Schreier, both recent bestsellers that present skeptical takes on the rapid rise of transgender identification among adolescents. So here what you're seeing is a book that literally, and keep in mind how insane this is, to say that a girl who hates wearing dresses and being given dolls is transgender.
It's a radical fringe view that is also potentially quite damaging, because the gender affirming care that a girl might be driven to get by those ideas is pretty irreversible and can have very, very serious knock-on effects.
It's not like that book is in some school libraries. It's in 77%.
That's wild. That is absolutely crazy.
And it is also wild that not a single one of the 5,000 school libraries searched had either of two best-selling books that were skeptical of trans ideology.
Well, it's weird to me that books on this would be present at all. I'm thinking of, at least my experience with the school library, and I don't know if there were any books that were published after 1980 in there, like literally.
Well, you went to a very poor school district.
Yeah.
But I remember my experience on the school library. I actually stole a book on how cults worked and brainwashing, and then another one on, well, they threw out books all the time. It wasn't really an issue. I saw all the giant book things they threw out, but I didn't want it on my personal record. Now I admit that I was interested in studying those things, but I was like, oh, if I end up, just starting a cult right after school, I don't want it on my record. I was checking out books on that and bioterrorism and, various forms of stuff like that. I was very interested in how all that worked and how to potentially rapidly change society if it needed to happen. But they had a pretty good selection of stuff.
Okay, so most school libraries have new books, you're saying.
And they throw out old books literally into the trash in the like truckload.
That makes me sad.
It's really sad. Yeah. I mean, your library, there should be a better
Maybe those truckloads went to my school's library. I'm pretty sure that's the case. In fact, many of the books that we were given for our English class and stuff had the rich high school like stamped on them, so we knew that they were the cast-offs from them. It made us feel pretty shitty. But like I said in another podcast, we sold them the drugs and they took them. In the end, they were the ones who hurt. So
yeah, fine. Right?
Yeah.
All right. Memoirs by non-progressive leaders are also notably scarce. While Dreams of My Father, the memoir of Democratic President Barack Obama, is found in 75% of sampled districts, Becoming by his wife is found in 65% of districts. Memoirs by Republican politicians like Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Mike Pompeo, Tim Scott, and Ron DeSantis were essentially nowhere to be found.
Wow, you'd think at least Vivek, I mean, he's like a young person's person.
So when they were looking at those 5,000 schools from 35 school districts, the Vivek one was found in 0%, Nikki Haley, 0%, Mike Pompeo, 0%, Tim Scott, 0%, Ron DeSantis, 0%, and Mike Pence, 6%. And then it lists, So basically, they are indoctrination centers at this point. And any claims that Republicans are trying to indoctrinate your kids are absolutely laughable in terms of at least effective. But of course, why would Republicans need to indoctrinate kids when Republicans have kids and Democrats don't? Right? Like, Democrats have to play this game aggressively. It's their only way to survive. So
yeah, although I have to also ask this question, which I think is important in any discussion related to political fights in America around banned books. Who is reading these books? You know, these are for the most part physical books. And I don't know how many high school students are actually reading. Aren't most of them just addicted to TikTok and or their AI boyfriends / girlfriends?
It's the autistic kids who are also
Oh.
the ones most likely to convert
Hmm.
to this
Yeah,
trend.
I wish I had better stats on who is actually checking out and or reading these books, because I have doubts. Yeah, and I think it's funny to me and a little bit misguided. This is very similar to me to the bathroom debate about schools with parents. And yes, I understand that there have been isolated incidents, and they are very worrying, about mixed gender bathrooms or policies where schools allow transitioning students to go into the bathroom of their chosen gender, and then they go in and they assault people in those bathrooms and cause problems. Like, I get that that's a thing, but they're very isolated incidents, and I'm sure that there are much more common incidents of just full out violent bullying outside of bathrooms, so I'm not that concerned about it, right?
Mhm.
What I think is that people are not putting their focus in the right place. They're not putting their focus where their actual damage is being done. Not that many people are reading books. Not that many people are being assaulted in bathrooms. And yet these are the two top discussions that are taking place. Like, as I run for state rep in our state, these are the discussions parents are having about their kids in school, not the curriculum, not the bias and skew of the teachers, not the bias and skew of the school boards, not social emotional learning. There are all these things that are taking place in school that are steeped within every moment of the day that every student is involved in. And yet we're talking about isolated bathroom incidents and books that I don't think anyone's reading. And refer to our podcast on nobody reads anymore, right? Like, no
Yeah.
one reads anymore. We have the data on that. Even when you look at best-selling books, and I think some of this is selection bias when you talk about the biographies of progressive leaders, Dreams of My Father versus biographies about Nikki Haley and stuff. It's just, Obama was a more famous figure. When you probably look at the bestseller status of those books, the incidence of them being in school libraries probably tracks almost perfectly to their bestseller status and rank among other books.
No,
So I
it
think
doesn't. We just went over that with the trans books. The two books that I mentioned that were in 0% of libraries were both New York Times bestsellers.
you did say they're sellers. Although we know from our data, which I think we covered in our episode on Why Nobody Reads, that New York Times bestseller status does not necessarily indicate a book that is actually bestselling. Amazon bestseller status is a much better read of that. But anyway, my argument
No,
still
it being an
holds.
Amazon bestseller was very few books. The point being, Simone, look, in
No
both
one
senses,
reads.
you can be a bestseller with few books, but to be a conservative New York Times bestseller is actually means that you're selling serious books.
That's
I
true.
think that you are being taken in by trying to take the middle approach here, where
Mm.
the reality is this is pretty horrific that this is happening. And if the position that you want to take is we should stop spending any money on public school libraries or school libraries, I am okay with that position, like transitioning them into other centers.
Well,
For
or having schools work in concert with the local libraries of any town or city, because pretty much every township and city in the United States has a library system. And I don't know why we need to have school libraries in addition to that, when we could maybe shift funding and be a little bit more efficient if we pulled resources.
I think that's a really good point, and I think they should do that. But let's continue, okay? And then at
Okay.
the end of this, we can talk about whether libraries matter at all in the modern age.
Yeah.
The American Library Association and groups like PEN America have raised alarm and millions in donations by warning of the continued rise in attempts to censor books and materials in the public school and academic libraries. PEN America estimates that 2,532 books were removed from schools in 32 states during the 2021 and 2022 school year. But an investigation by the Heritage Foundation found that 75% of those so-called banned books were actually widely available to students. My own research uncovered the same. In some cases, such as Amanda Gromer's The Hill We Climb, a poetry book was supposedly quote unquote banned by the Miami-Dade County School District. It was actually just moved from the elementary school to the middle school section of the library.
Oh,
And Gender Queer, a graphic memoir for teens about gender identity that the New York Times called, quote, the most banned book in the country, end quote, was available in about 25% of the school districts I surveyed.
another gripe that I have, you can take this out if you must, but where are students actually being radicalized? Where does an adolescent in the United States or elsewhere actually decide that they're trans? I do not think it is in their school library. I think that it is when they go to an anime fan fiction forum and hang out in chat forums online and start getting radicalized by people there. And first they start identifying as, non-binary, and then they start using they them pronouns, and it goes on from there. And yes, their school absolutely plays a role in this to a great extent. I think public schools are influential in tipping the scales, and that's something that parents absolutely need to discuss. But it is only in the form of affirming something that has begun online, at home, on their own, in chat forums, and certainly not chat forums, and certainly not on websites that have anything to do with gender affirming care or politics or anything else. They have to do with anime, they have to do with fanfic, they have to do with fun, they have to do with fashion, they have to do with culture. Nothing about politics. And so when parents are trying to ban books, like if for example the conservative dream came true, right, and suddenly there were only gendered bathrooms and there were only no books about sexuality at all in schools ever, and there was no sex ed, it wouldn't change a goddamn thing, because you would still have students radicalizing the same way that they're radicalizing now. And if you don't change the policies and the state laws right now around protecting children who are starting to identify as non-binary and who choose to identify in their schools as different names and different genders, and parents are often not told about this. And in some cases, like you have in Minnesota, that's a sanctuary state for trans kids, you have governors like Tim Walz, who's now the VP candidate in the United States, saying, okay, well, we can even take kids from their parents if the parents don't agree with the kid's choice to transition. That's when you have problems. And it bothers me that there's so much discussion. I mean, obviously the free press has to cater to a very mainstream audience that is still concerned about this. It just really bothers me how misguided this all is.
Yeah, so just so you're aware of what this book has in it, that's in 25% of school libraries.
Okay.
It has a guide on how to give fellatio with pictures of a kid giving fellatio to another kid. They appear to be
kids.
Yeah, they appear to be underage. I guess from the picture here, they're probably about 16. And then in this one, it talks about how to masturbate. And yeah, so it's some pictures of men and then a man masturbating to two men having sex.
That's sweet. No homo. It's like it's definitely straight.
25%. They call this the most banned book in the country. What they mean is most people complain about this book, but it is
the most complained about book. Okay.
But that doesn't mean it's actually not in libraries. It's in 25% of student libraries.
25%. Yeah, it's honestly, here's the interesting thing. It seems more explicit than the joy of sex, which is one of the more famous like original illustrated guides to sex. It was supposed to be fairly didactic, because I don't think the joy of sex even really talked about masturbation, like, sort of, not participating in a sex act. It was really more about like how to participate in male female mutual sex acts. And this sounds even more explicit than that, and that is just insane.
Well, you want to hear some other insane stuff?
I'm a little afraid, but let's do it.
17% of surveyed districts carried "Freedom is a Constant Struggle: Ferguson, Palestine, and the Foundations of a Movement," in which Angela Davis argues that, quote, "repression associated with Israeli settler colonialism was so evident and so blatant, and that, quote, the Israeli military made no attempt to conceal the violence they inflicted upon the Palestinian people," end quote. The school libraries of Broward County, Florida alone have 16 copies of the book, and precisely 0 copies of Bibi, My Story, Benjamin Netanyahu's autobiography, which refutes Davis's allegations. Of the 35 schools sampled, only 1 carries Bibi. Northside ISD once again. So it appears that there's like one school that like actually tries to carry both sides of things.
That cares about Israel a little.
Recently, we have seen reports of the rise of anti-Semitism in American schools. According to Harvard-Harris poll from last month, 67% of 18 to 24-year-olds believe that, quote, Jews are oppressors, end quote, and, quote, should be treated as such, end quote. Is this at all surprising if students aren't being exposed to viewpoints that counter this argument? which I see is very true. I've seen very few people who have this like anti-Jewish perspective actually look up the other side, actually look up, the foundings of the efforts that the Jews have made to try to reconcile with the Palestinian people, the efforts that they have made in peace negotiations, the absolute just like they just believe the narrative that's being fed to them instead of researching both sides, and it's really disappointing to me. But here, now we are going to go down a list of books here, okay?
Okay.
So these are books written by some of the world's best known progressive thinkers, okay? And we're going to go through what percent of school libraries are in. Communist Manifestos in 75%. Cast the Origins of Our Discontent, 60%. The 1619 Project, 54%.
Oof.
Stamped, 71%.
What's Stamped about?
I don't know. I can add it in post. It's a book by the guy who wrote the anti-racist book, Abraham X. Kennedy. The full title is Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism, and You, or Stamped from the Beginning. An African-American and Latinx History of the United States, 40%. Latinx is such a racist race. The New Jim Crow, 60%. Guide to Political Revolution, that's by Bernie Sanders, 40%. White Fragility, 54%. That horrible racist book is in 54%. So you want to talk about race, 57%. This book is anti-racist, 45%. Now let's look at mainstream books that have a conservative mindset, right?
Okay.
You're like, okay, well, they got Karl Marx. What about Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom?
Yeah.
Right? 8%.
Yeah. Oh.
Created Equal by Dr. Ben Carson, 5%. Woke Racism, 3%. Breaking History by Jared Kushner, 2%. Social Justice Fallacies, 0%. That's by Thomas Sowell. A great thinker, by the way. The War on the West by Douglas Murray, 0%. The 1619 Project, a critique, 0%. The Case Against Impeaching Trump, 0%. Decades of Decadence by Mark Rubio, 0%. The Diversity Delusion, 0%. And The Case for Trump, 0%. No wonder only 16% of Gen Z says they are proud to live in America, according to a survey in 2023. They don't have access to books that present our country in an honest light.
Yeah.
And it's any surprise that 76% of Gen Z and millennial women wouldn't date a Republican, according to a Change Research poll from September.
Right. They're presented as sisters. Why would you?
Yeah, they've never been exposed to any conservative ideas.
And that's definitely how I was raised.
So what do we do about this? Like, well, how do you realistically combat this? I mean, I think one, realistically, these decisions are being made by the local librarians. And so what this shows me is, as conservatives, you should not be fighting to get these books in libraries or what's in libraries, because you are never going to win against the bureaucracy of minimum waged bureaucrats. Okay, like the labor.
Yeah. Nuke the library, bring back shop class. So take the money that used to go to libraries, let libraries be handled by existing libraries that already are present in local communities, which are fantastic and wonderful and should be getting attention and should be getting used.
I disagree with that too. I think libraries should not be funded.
No, I think libraries are amazing third places and should be given more support in communities. And frankly, it's a great place to give teens and kids another place that's not just school to go and hang out and study and learn and meet with the community. So we'll have to disagree on that.
I'll agree with it insofar as they are useful to homeschooling projects and stuff like that. But I think
and homeschooling groups, libraries are amazing places. They're fantastic to hang out, to just go through the books. I used to spend, before I met you as an adult, I would just spend like a whole weekend day.
And this is how they get the autists. Little autists like you are in libraries. And
no, because they're in like Octavian would be in like the train section, and I was always in the fashion history section and like cultural history. So no one wants to read these political books. They're so boring. That's the thing is I'm pretty sure. I mean, sure, that one school had 14 copies of one of those books, but I just don't think they're in that much circulation. You know, I think that these are what the librarians are excited about. They're not what the readers are excited about. The readers are excited about romance novels. This shows up when you can see how often they're checked out. You know, in the old days, you could see.
Okay, I'll buy the romance novels. That is what the young girls are after. They're porn.
I'm telling you, man. Now, here's the thing: is I did read Yaoi manga when I was a kid, but it didn't
explain to the audience what Yaoi is. We have some older listeners who may not know.
Yaoi is man-on-man romances.
Sorry, say that again.
Man-on-man romances is what Yaoi is. Yuri is girl on girl, and Yaoi is very popular among young women in the United States. Maybe it's a little more of a deep cut among weebs, but in Japan, there are entire yaoi conventions. A lot of people argue
It's not
that
that much of a deep cut in the United States. I mean,
it's not,
yaoi,
yeah,
I
it's
know
not that
lots
much.
of girls who read yaoi.
And,
Yaoi is
and
very
so there's
popular
a
among
lot of
straight young
theories as
girls.
to why women like yaoi. For example, it's kind of nice to enjoy like romantic and sexual scenarios that don't involve like female bodies or female objectification, and you don't have to kind of like put yourself in there. You could just kind of enjoy men. So anyway, like I enjoyed, like I would say that there are some materials that that
Oh, you're
conservatives would
like
get
me.
their panties in a
Did you
bunch
find
about that
yaoi
actually,
arousing, or did you just enjoy the
oh my god,
stories?
it's just so sweet. Like, no, like I would read girl boy romances too, and sometimes be like, wait, you and I watched part of that. Remember the ice skating anime?
Oh, yeah.
Come on, like anyone can watch that and be like, oh my god, like it's great. And like the thing
Okay.
is, like, for me, fan service in anime does nothing for me. Like the jiggling boobs, it's just so like imagine, and I'm sure like male fan service doesn't really do anything for you when you're watching anime. So, imagine if it was just all female fan service for you and cute romances. I think that would probably maybe
I
be
mean,
more appealing.
Disney made a yaoi recently.
The mermaid one, the gay
Yeah,
mermaids.
Luca.
Yeah, but
Luca was
it wasn't that
definitely
good. I
it
mean,
wasn't that good, but it was
compare
definitely
Luca
modeled on
to
the yaoi.
the ice skating anime. I
Yeah,
mean, there
but
was chemistry in the ice skating anime. Oh my
and this
god.
is one of these things where, like, you're talking about what young girls actually like, and we had
Yeah.
mentioned this in a recent episode where everyone was like, "No, young girls like buff, muscly men," and I'm like, "Then you have no young girl friends. Like, you must
Yeah.
have not actually talked to a late teenage girl, early
Yeah.
20s girl,
Yeah.
because if you at all engage with these communities, they do not. They like their yaoi, they like
Mhm.
their Legolas, they like their
Well, but I also want to
Dorothy.
emphasize, there are these books that like are supposed to instruct men on how to masturbate to other men, as you described with that one book. What are teens actually reading? Teens are totally watching men go down on each other, whatever, like whatever men do. Sorry, I'm rusty. But it is yaoi. It is very
Yeah,
different
and I think
stuff.
that you're right, and I actually really wanna elevate this because you mentioned this earlier in this particular podcast, but I think this is really true. Focus on the culture war where it is actually being won and happening,
Well, yeah,
and not
well,
on the
focus on the
fake
points of
battlefield.
conversion. Yeah, focus on where the
Libraries,
radicalization
just
happens.
defund them. Nobody's even using them
Well,
anymore.
that's what I'm saying. Take the funding that used to go to school libraries, bring back shop class, but like the modern version of it, right? Teach people how to fix things, teach
And
people how to
weld
cook,
and yeah.
teach people how to do their own laundry. So bring back home ec, bring back shop class, call it adulting. Okay. I just
It gives a
please
lot of
teach
yeah,
people how to
call it
live
I
life.
love calling it adulting so people aren't like, "Oh, that's sexist, you brought back home ed, adulting." But
Yeah.
here's
Oh,
what I
even if it
would
wasn't like,
say
if you really like, if that's too offensive for people, just teach teens how to prepare tax returns and have that be their first job. Imagine that, right?
but
How
here's what I
cool.
would say, Simone.
Okay.
What people are missing is at the same time as you shouldn't be focused on the false areas of operation, i.e.,
Mhm.
whether it's gendered bathrooms or whether it is libraries, you
Mhm.
need to be focused on where they're actually getting your kids.
Yes,
And that
yes.
is fan fiction communities is one of the biggest.
Mhm,
Fan fiction communities. You
mhm.
need to pay attention to this. If you aren't paying attention to the battle happening in fan fiction communities, then you aren't paying attention to how your daughter is going to be indoctrinated
Yeah, you
into all
don't know
this.
where your kids are being radicalized. Yeah, because you're thinking,
Um,
"Oh, it's that nerdy, innocent place." And I would say that there's a long history of nerdy, innocent places being demonized. For example, Dungeons& and Dragons was caught up in the satanic panic of the '80s, and that was totally misguided. But this is one of those places where it actually is a real source of radicalization that parents need to look at, and you're absolutely
but
right.
but you win this by winning the fight in the community, by creating alternate iterations of this community. So, for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
if you approach something like the Satanic Panic by banning Dungeons and Dragons, then what you ensure is that your kids are secretly going to Dungeons and Dragons events
No, and it
that
totally
you have
backfired.
no say over and that are
It totally
antagonistic to
backfired.
your perspective.
Yeah.
The way you win the Satanic Panic, the way you win the fan fiction wars is to create alternate communities that are copacetic
Good.
with
Yeah.
your worldviews. If you created the Christian, what's the word I'm looking for, Dungeons and Dragons club, then your kids are protected. In fact, one of our friends who lives in our local community does this. He's a dungeon master for a group that a lot of his employees go to, but also his young kids go to, who are like, I think like 8 through 16 or something. And they have a blast at it. And kids are not as repelled by doing things with their parents as you would think if you engage with earnesty in the activities that they enjoy. And this can be reading their latest fan fiction and stuff like this. And it's a good way to educate your kids to help them learn better language, right?
Absolutely.
Getting kids to engage creatively in things that they're not shamed for and that you can engage them on is a great way. You're like, oh, you want this to win the local fan fiction competition? Like, I'll help you with this, etc. Right? Like, this is how you win. When you ban this stuff, that's where you lose. Or when you focus on battles, if you're out there, like, I bet you so many of these parents, right, who are like fighting, like, to get this like book instructing on fellatio and stuff like that out of school libraries. If you ask them, yeah, when was the last time your kid went to the school library? They'd be like, I don't know, like maybe once a year, maybe not at all, maybe as part of a class. I don't know. So why are you expending time fighting this? It's performative. It's part of a social hierarchy battle more than it's about actually trying to make things better. And yet it makes the entire Republican movement look bad when we should just be not funding these libraries and focusing on the community institutions, as Simone says, the community libraries that already exist.
Yeah. Well, I think the other important thing that cannot be understated is addressing policies that allow schools to be places where once the radicalization has begun, they bring it up from 10 to 100 by affirming that and by legitimizing it. Remember, there's that story how when I was a kid, I just like innocently said at one point that I was going to marry my best friend and we are going to have 100 cats and we were going to live in an RV. And my school decided that I had just come out as a lesbian and had a call with my parents and had a call with there was all these meetings because they basically made it a thing. And I just, I mean, they didn't have a meeting about how I wanted to have 100 cats. This was how unserious. I mean, I was, I guess, I was just I don't know. I just assumed I was going to be a lesbian because everyone around me was a lesbian. All my kids, all my friends' parents were lesbian couples. So I just figured it didn't really matter what gender you married. And I didn't know what I was. But I think that is something that is happening at schools is kids are saying, doing things like being a tom girl. And rather than just being like, oh, she's a tom girl, rather than being like, oh, Simone says she's going to marry her best friend and have 100 cats, they're like, oh.
But there's nothing you can do about that. The whole bureaucracy is corrupted, okay? There's nothing you can do without taking down the school system.
There are laws that, I mean, come on. The Tim Walz.
So close to launching right now. We've been doing all the final polishes. It's getting so nice. I really just want the product that hits the shelves to be something that people can be proud of. And I feel like we're there. We're waiting for the final ad to be made. It might actually go live before this episode does. But so if it does, check it out.
Yeah. Well, you might throw the promo video in here.
Sadly, we're still a few days away from the promo video being done, but we probably are going to have the first final draft done today, which is exciting. Although, for any who can't wait, here is the first 15 seconds of the promo. Frankly, we're terrified to send our kids into the legacy school system. To that end, my wife and I built the Collins Institute, a comprehensive interactive map or skill tree comprising all of human knowledge. The platform is designed to be usable as soon as a student gets comfortable with reading and goes about midway through a PhD in most subjects.
If you want
to
to the end, could be kind of fun. But yeah, I'm just saying there are actually state laws. There is actually legislation in place that can empower teachers to not tell parents as kids start to go through the process of transitioning. And I think that addressing those is important. If parents are at least informed, it doesn't matter how radicalized teachers are, parents can then have conversations with their children and at least have a part in the de-radicalization process. Of course, there are plenty of bits about how conservative parents hear that their daughter has decided to transition. And so then they decide to transition too and start making fun of it. And the daughter chooses to not, because it's not
Yeah.
cool anymore, because now dad's dressing like a girl and affirming her, and she doesn't like that because now it's not cool anymore. It's like, I'm just saying, yes, I understand your point, and you cannot undo the progressive nature of many public school teachers. That said, you can absolutely change the legislation that makes it hard for parents to intervene when their children start getting radicalized and their culture starts being torn from them, and they start being converted really heavily. Don't you agree?
No.
No?
You need to prevent them from getting to that point. The moment you realize that this is happening, it's usually too late. It's because you found the hormone pills that they've been taking for the past 6 months. Those are the way
I disagree. I think, if teachers, have to report, for example, to parents that their kid is asked to go by a different pronoun or
They
something.
don't have to report that. Are you saying you want to change the law around that? Right now, they're legally mandated to not report that.
And no, that's what I'm saying, is the laws around protecting that are making it harder for parents to catch things before they go too far.
Okay, so change the law around that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like if a parent, the thing is, and I've listened to so many interviews with detransitioners, and it never starts immediately as I am a girl, I am a boy. It starts as I'm they them.
I want to try this out,
Yeah,
I'm
and
just
they
curious.
start by so commonly it's just being non-binary, or changing to a new nickname, and it's just playing around with it. And parents can very subtly start having meaningful conversations with their kids about things like body dysmorphia, about their discomfort, about other things going on in their lives. Sometimes the stress that drives people to body dysmorphia or to turning to gender affirming care is because there are big problems elsewhere in life. I mean, all of my times when I started doing things to hurt myself when I was an adolescent, like when I started starving myself, it was because of the stress that I experienced at school, and school really wasn't working for me. And the way I dealt with that was by by starving myself. And other kids are dealing with this by trying to change their identity, by transitioning. These are all areas where parents can start to intervene. So I disagree with you that it's not like, okay, once they've started to explore they them, they can't go back. They absolutely can.
Yeah, but your job is like 99% harder at that point.
So
Because by telling them to go back or by getting them to question this in any way, you are now seen as abusive to them. And they then will begin to quarantine their mind to any ideas that you are putting in there. Which is why you need to give them a full understanding of human sexuality before the school presents an alternate understanding of human sexuality.
and also a full understanding of what transitioning is and what gender affirming care is. Most of the people coming into this, like we did an episode on Planned Parenthood, what young women are being told, for example, before given testosterone, is they're having often just 2-hour consultations with someone at Planned Parenthood where they list very few of the symptoms of transitioning, like two symptoms, one being like vaginal dryness, which is like, oh, who cares, right? And then they go in and they don't understand. Now, if you educate your kids well before puberty about not only puberty and sex ed and all that, but also like, by the way, one thing that people often do at this time, or that more people are doing, is they're transitioning, they're taking gender blocking hormones. Here are the impacts, fertility, osteoporosis, IQ hit, like here's what happens, it's irreversible. Then they're going to come into this really differently, because again, what people are being told as kids is it's reversible and that it doesn't cause any problems and that it has all these benefits.
Yeah, well, and I think show
Education.
them pictures and video of the surgery in the same way that they used to, they scared our generation out of pregnancy by showing people like videos of pregnancy.
Snacky Smalls presents The Miracle of Childbirth. Here we can see the water breaking.
Ew!
Later, the contractions are happening closer together. Mom sure is in a lot of pain. We can see the crown of the baby's head stretching the vaginal walls in ways never before thought possible by Mom. That's right.
I never saw any of those.
Oh yeah, they did that where I was. Just go through videos of it, and they'll be like, oh, okay, this is not something. Because a lot of what I've heard is the way that they sell the medical transition to people, they don't really explain what's happening. They like explain it super quickly and in super short euphemisms. And that most of the detransitioners are like, if I actually understood what was going to happen to my body, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, like getting a mastectomy can actually be pretty Like there are two ways to do it. I think in one way you have to have little ports to like drain the pus or something. And then another way you try not to, but then it can lead to a lot of bruising and internal bleeding. Yeah, it gets pretty intense for sure. So
Anyway,
yeah.
horrifying. Love you to death, Simone. I am so glad that
It's
I
funny
married.
how it all comes back to anime in the end.
Yeah, it all
doesn't
comes
it?
back to anime in the end. Yeah, you got to make sure you have good manga supplies at these places, right? That's what everyone. I've actually heard that that's like the one thing that still a lot of people read.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, and it's just physically. Although there's so many great apps for it now
Well,
too.
you know why I think it is?
We have to plug. What is it? Dating advice from the Duke of Hell. Love advice
Oh
from the
yes,
Duke of Hell.
great like online comic.
So
But hold on,
good.
this is the thing about like manga, right? And it's actually interesting why I think manga has continued to do well is
Mhm.
because it hasn't been captured in the same way that the publishing industry has. As we remarked in our other video on the publishing industry, right now, most of the publishing industry is just a pet project of the publishers and doesn't make them money. They really make money by basically just off of Bibles and back sales, which is a shame that it's going to all the rest of this horrifying stuff, right? But anyway, so then they funnel the money from that into making the industry, but it also means that they're not really focused on like making money in the industry, which
Mhm.
means that they're okay with kicking out talented writers if they don't fit their agenda, right? Which is why all of the teen novels are so boring and by the books these days. It's why all the stuff coming out of the industry is boring and by the books. And it's why when kids want something that has any degree of intellectual vitality to it, they have to go to non-woke markets. In the same way that I think that that's why a lot of conservatives watch anime these days, is because in the United States, the market is so, what's the word here? Well, terrible, right?
Yeah.
You know, you're if you want to go watch movies or shows, like they're all like wokeified, right? Like they don't even seem to care about making money anymore. It's bizarre almost. But you know, you go to Japan and you can get actually unique ideas that don't have any sort of like ideology that they're trying to push on you. But it's also the same with fan fiction, and that's why people are drawn to fan fiction, is because it is genuinely when people are pushing ideology through fan fiction, it's an ideology they actually care about instead of this bland corporate iteration of this ideology.
Yeah.
So it can be used to convey toxic, ultra progressive, ultra urban monoculture ideologies, but it can also be used to convey conservative ideologies.
Yeah.
In fact, fan fiction was one of the core ways the EA community got started, was the Harry
Oh
Potter.
yeah. The Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. But so much better than that is, and you can find this on Webtoons, although apparently print copy is coming out. It's going to be in Barnes and Noble soon, so I'm so excited. It's by the French author and illustrator Unfins, and it is called Love Advice from the Great Duke of Hell. I have not stayed up late to read something like to the point of being sleep deprived since I was maybe 13 years old. And this, I could not put it down. It is so freaking like laughing out loud. It's just so
I got you into it, right?
You got me into it. Yes, you did. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So good.
Anyway,
You're
love you,
welcome.
Josh.
And in exchange for this amazing graphic novel recommendation, audience, please like and subscribe. If you can, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, or wait, podcasts? Apple Podcasts. Apple Podcasts. Please and thank you. Or as our son Octavian would say, please life and describe. It would mean
Life and describe this. It's very important.
Life and describe.
Otherwise, other people won't see it.
Mm-hmm. And don't you want them to also read Love Advice from the Great Duke of Hell and maybe listen to us talk?
All right. Love you to death, Simone.
I love you too, gorgeous. What do you want for dinner, by the way? And I figured we can do a pasta bar for you again, where you have like your pesto, we have mac and cheese.
I'm gonna do bao tonight because I've been having a lot of chips and I'm pretty full. So maybe do 2 pieces of bao.
Just 2, not all 4. They're little.
No, 2.
2. Just 2
4
bao.
is a lot of bao.
Okay, and you can pack the car. I'll steam the bao, and you get the kids.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, I love you, gorgeous.
I love you too.
He's doing a new one called Vampire Family.
Ooh, that sounds cute.
I know. I need to check it out. I need to see if we can.
Hello, Simone. You getting a little distracted there playing drums on a child? Are you beating her repeatedly?
Well, we have to beat our children with rhythm, of course.
With rhythm, of course. Yeah, I mean, we got to get into it, right? You know, if you don't savor the beating.
She's just got the cutest smile on her face. I just can't. I
You
just
gonna pick her
can't.
up and show the camera? You can't not let the audience see.
Oh, well, I don't know. She'll keep smiling because she likes being beaten.
Oh,
So
she doesn't want to smile when she's not being beaten. Yeah, I mean, our kid, little masochist, this one, right?
yeah.
Anyway,